I was standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning, loading 50-pound bags of De-Icer onto my flatbed truck, when a pearl-white Escalade pulled up with enough force to leave skid marks on the pavement. The door swung open and out stepped Patricia Whitmore, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was shellacked into submission, and her lips were pressed into that distinctive line that only emerges when a suburban woman believes she's about to unleash righteous justice. "Excuse me, sir. What exactly do you think you're doing?" Her voice carried that particular pitch that made dogs in neighboring counties perk up their ears. I straightened up, wiping rock salt residue off my gloves. "Loading my truck, Patricia. Same thing I do every other morning this time of year." She clicked forward on heels that had no business being worn on icy concrete, clutching a leather-bound binder to her chest like it contained the nuclear codes. "Your stockpile of commercial de-icing materials is in direct violation of Meadowbrook Heights HOA Code Section 7, Subsection 4, Paragraph 2, which explicitly states that no homeowner shall store commercial quantities of any substance on residential property without prior written approval from the board." I blinked at her. "Patricia, I've been running my business out of this property for 8 years, long before you moved in and long before you became HOA president. That doesn't matter." She flipped open her binder, jabbing a manicured nail at a highlighted section. "The rules were updated 6 months ago at our annual meeting, which you failed to attend, I might add. Your compliance is mandatory, not optional." "I was working during your meeting. You know, the thing I do to pay my bills, including the HOA fees that fund your little power trips." Her face flushed red. "This is not a power trip. This is about maintaining property values and ensuring our neighborhood doesn't look like some sort of industrial storage facility. I've received multiple complaints from your neighbors about the unsightly appearance of your property." I glanced at my neatly organized garage and the covered storage area I'd built specifically to keep everything orderly. 6 pallets of De-Icer bags, 3 commercial spreaders, and various equipment, all arranged with military precision under a weatherproof canopy. Unsightly. Everything is stored properly and safely. You can't even see it from the street. Mrs. Henderson across the street can see it from her second-floor bathroom window. Then maybe Mrs. Henderson should invest in some curtains instead of spying on her neighbors while she's on the toilet. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "How dare you? I'm giving you 72 hours to remove all commercial materials from this property, or the HOA will be forced to take action." "What kind of action?" She smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "The kind that involves daily fines of $500, liens on your property, and potential seizure of non-compliant materials. The board has full legal authority, Mr. Nelson. I suggest you don't test us." She pivoted on her ridiculous heels and marched back to her Escalade, leaving me standing in my driveway with a half-loaded truck and a headache that was rapidly approaching migraine territory. "My name is Scott Nelson, and I own Nelson De-Icing Services, a business I built from the ground up after retiring from the Army. I'd served 12 years, done 2 tours overseas, and came back to Rockford, Illinois, with a modest savings account and a desire to never take orders from incompetent leadership again. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now dealing with Patricia Whitmore, who made some of my worst commanding officers look reasonable by comparison. I finished loading the truck and headed out to my first job of the morning. The Winnebago County Department of Transportation had contracted me 3 years ago to supply bulk de-icing materials for their road crews. It started small, just a few pallets here and there during particularly rough winters, but had grown into a substantial operation. I supplied 17 different municipalities across 3 counties, maintained relationships with regional distributors, and employed 6 people during peak winter months. My phone rang as I merged onto Interstate 90. It was Tom Chen, the county's transportation director and one of the few government officials I actually respected. "Scott, how's my favorite supplier doing this morning?" "Been better, Tom. HOA president just threatened to seize my inventory." There was a pause. "Come again." I explained the situation while navigating through early morning traffic. When I finished, Tom let out a low whistle. "That's insane. Does she have any idea how much material you keep on hand? Or what it would cost the county if we suddenly lost our primary supplier 2 weeks before a major storm system?" Apparently, she doesn't care. Something about property values and unsightly appearances. "Scott, you store everything properly. I've been to your facility." "Hell, it's cleaner than our own county storage yard." He paused. "Look, let me make some calls. The county attorney might want to hear about this. We've got contractual obligations, and if some HOA interferes with our ability to maintain county roads during winter weather, that becomes a public safety issue." "I appreciate it, Tom, but I don't want to cause problems." "You're not causing problems. Patricia Whitmore is. There's a difference." We hung up, and I spent the rest of the day making deliveries. The weather forecast was calling for a significant winter storm in 5 days, which meant everyone was scrambling to prepare. I dropped off 2 tons of material at the county yard in Rockford, another ton in Loves Park, and made smaller deliveries to 3 municipal facilities in Cherry Valley, Mashesney Park, and Roscoe. By the time I got home that evening, there was a certified letter taped to my front door. Inside was a formal notice from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA demanding immediate removal of all commercial materials, citing various code violations and threatening legal action. The letter was signed by Patricia Whitmore, board members Karen Steinberg and Linda Wu, and included a detailed list of fines and penalties that would be assessed if I failed to comply. I sat at my kitchen table, reading through the document while eating leftover Chinese food. My lawyer, Daniel Rodriguez, had handled my business contracts since day one. I sent him a photo of the letter and got a response within 20 minutes. "Call me. This is potentially actionable." Daniel picked up on the first ring. "Scott, this is absurd. They can't just seize private property because they don't like how it looks. Can they fine me?" "Technically, yes, if you're violating HOA covenants. But here's the thing. I pulled the original covenants for Meadowbrook Heights. There's a grandfather clause for any business operating on residential property prior to the 2018 covenant revision. Your business predates that by 3 years. So they can't touch me. Not legally. But HOAs don't always care about what's legal. They care about what they can get away with." He paused. "I'll draft a response letter citing the grandfather clause and threatening counter-litigation if they proceed. That should slow them down. And if it doesn't, then we go to court and they lose. But litigation is expensive and time-consuming, even when you're in the right." I thanked him and hung up, feeling the familiar weight of bureaucratic warfare settling onto my shoulders. I'd dealt with plenty of red tape in the military, but at least there was usually a clear chain of command and defined protocols. HOAs existed in some bizarre legal gray zone where power-hungry suburbanites could make your life miserable with minimal oversight. The next morning I was up at 5:30, going through my usual routine. Coffee, check the weather, review the day's delivery schedule, and load the truck. I was halfway through stacking bags when Patricia's Escalade appeared again, this time accompanied by a white Ford F-150 with Meadowbrook Heights HOA enforcement stenciled on the door. A man in his mid-50s climbed out of the truck, wearing a fluorescent safety vest and carrying a clipboard. Patricia emerged from her Escalade looking triumphant. "Mr. Nelson, this is Dennis Crawford, our HOA enforcement officer. He's here to document your violations and oversee the removal of non-compliant materials." I set down the bag I was holding. "Dennis, no offense, but you're not touching anything on my property." Dennis looked uncomfortable. "Look, buddy, I'm just doing my job. Mrs. Whitmore says there's a violation, so I have to write it up. Write whatever you want, but nobody's removing anything." Patricia stepped forward, her face flushed. "You're in violation of HOA covenants. The board has voted unanimously to enforce compliance. If you refuse to remove these materials voluntarily, we'll obtain a court order and have them removed forcibly. You'll be billed for all associated costs, including storage fees." "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," I said flatly. "Oh, I'm sure we will. Just like I'm sure your lawyer will explain that HOA covenants are legally binding contracts and that your refusal to comply will result in a lien on your property." She turned to Dennis. "Document everything. I want photographs, measurements, and a complete inventory." Dennis started walking around my property, taking pictures with his phone. I stood there watching, feeling my blood pressure rise with each click of his camera. This was my home, my business, and my livelihood, and some suburban tyrant thought she could just bully her way through because she didn't like looking at rock salt. My phone rang. It was Tom Chen again. "Scott, the county attorney wants to meet with you. How's your schedule this afternoon?" "I can make time." "Good. Come by the county building around 2 and bring copies of everything related to this HOA situation." The Winnebago County Administration Building was a sprawling complex on West State Street in downtown Rockford. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a folder stuffed with documents. The HOA letter, my original property deed, business licenses, and contracts with various municipalities. Tom met me in the lobby and escorted me upstairs to a conference room where 3 other people were waiting. He introduced me to Sarah Kim, the county attorney, Margaret Foster from the Transportation Department's legal division, and James Walsh, some sort of risk management specialist. Sarah was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who got straight to the point. "Mr. Nelson, Tom's briefed us on your situation. I've reviewed the HOA's letter and frankly, it's concerning from multiple perspectives. The county has contractual obligations with your company, and any interference with your ability to fulfill those contracts creates liability issues for us." "I'm doing everything I can to stay operational," I said. "But if they follow through on their threats, I'll be dealing with daily fines, potential liens, and possible seizure of inventory worth over $40,000. Margaret leaned forward. "Let's be clear about something. The county depends on your services. We've got a major storm system coming, and if our road crews don't have access to adequate de-icing materials, people could die. Accidents, stranded motorists, delayed emergency response times. This isn't about hurt feelings or property aesthetics. This is public safety," James nodded. "Which means the county has a vested interest in ensuring your business remains operational. If this HOA's actions interfere with critical county services, we can potentially intervene." "How?" I asked. Sarah pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. "Several options. First, we can file an amicus brief if this goes to court, arguing that the HOA's actions create a public safety hazard. Second, we can invoke emergency procurement clauses and designate your property as essential infrastructure, which would supersede local HOA regulations. Third, and this is the nuclear option, we can pursue litigation against the HOA for tortious interference with contractual obligations. I stared at her. You'd sue my HOA, if necessary. The county has deep pockets and good lawyers. HOAs usually don't. She smiled slightly. Sometimes the threat alone is enough to make them reconsider their position. We spent the next hour going through various scenarios and legal strategies. By the time I left the county building, I felt slightly better about the situation, but also worried about escalation. I didn't want to be at war with my neighbors, but Patricia Whitmore seemed determined to make this personal. That evening, I received an email from the HOA. The board had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss my ongoing violations and invited me to attend to present my case. The meeting was set for the following evening at 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. I showed up at 6:50, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt, carrying copies of my business licenses, county contracts, and Daniel's legal opinion on the grandfather clause. The clubhouse was a modest building at the entrance of the neighborhood, decorated with generic landscape paintings and uncomfortable folding chairs. About 30 residents were already there, sitting in clusters and whispering. I recognized some faces from neighborhood barbecues and chance encounters at the mailbox, but most were strangers. Patricia sat at a table at the front of the room with 4 other board members. Karen Steinberg, a thin woman with severe glasses, Linda Wu, who always seemed vaguely apologetic, Bob Martinez, a retired cop who rarely spoke, and Frank Henderson, whose wife apparently objected to viewing my storage area from her bathroom window. Patricia called the meeting to order by banging a gavel like she was presiding over the Supreme Court. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on such short notice. As many of you know, we're here to discuss a serious violation of community standards by one of our residents, Mr. Scott Nelson. I felt 30 pairs of eyes turn toward me. Mr. Nelson operates a commercial de-icing business from his residential property in direct violation of HOA covenants, Patricia continued. He stores large quantities of industrial materials, operates commercial vehicles at all hours, and has essentially transformed his property into a warehouse facility. This impacts all of our property values and degrades the residential character of our community. A woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. How long has this been going on? 8 years, Patricia said, making it sound like I'd been running a meth lab. The previous board failed to enforce our covenants, but this board takes our responsibilities seriously. Karen Steinberg cleared her throat. We've attempted to work with Mr. Nelson, offering reasonable accommodations and compromise solutions, but he's refused to cooperate. That was complete bullshit and I couldn't stay quiet. That's not true. Nobody's offered me any compromises. Patricia showed up at my house, threatened me with fines and seizure, and gave me 72 hours to shut down my business. Patricia's face hardened. You had the opportunity to apply for a variance 6 months ago when the new covenants were adopted. You chose not to participate in the process. Because I was working, and because I was told by the previous board president that my business was grandfathered in. Verbal assurances mean nothing. The written covenants are what matter. Bob Martinez spoke up for the first time. Scott, I get that this is your livelihood, but rules are rules. We can't have commercial operations in a residential neighborhood. It sets a bad precedent. Bob, with respect, I'm not running a factory. I store materials in a covered area that's not visible from the street, and I make deliveries during normal business hours. I employ 6 people from this community during winter months. This isn't some fly-by-night operation. Frank Henderson leaned forward. My wife has to look at industrial equipment every time she goes to the bathroom. That's not what we signed up for when we moved here. Then your wife should stop looking out the window while she's on the toilet, I said, which got a few scattered laughs but didn't help my case. Patricia banged her gavel. This isn't a joke, Mr. Nelson. The board has a fiduciary duty to protect property values and maintain community standards. Your business poses potential liability issues, creates traffic concerns, and violates the fundamental character of our neighborhood. What liability issues? I challenged. I carry $2 million in commercial insurance. My vehicles are properly registered and maintained. I've never had a safety incident, never had a complaint until you became president. Linda Wu spoke softly. Scott, I understand your frustration, but we have to consider all residents. Some people feel uncomfortable with commercial activity in their neighborhood. Some people, or just Patricia. The room got very quiet. Patricia stood up, her face flushed. I move that the board proceed with enforcement action, including daily fines of $500 until Mr. Nelson removes all commercial materials from his property. All in favor? Karen, Frank, and Bob raised their hands. Linda hesitated, then slowly raised hers as well. Motion passes. Patricia looked directly at me. You have 72 hours starting now. After that, fines begin accruing and we'll pursue legal action to place a lien on your property. I stood up. You're making a mistake. I have contracts with Winnebago County and 16 other municipalities. If you interfere with my ability to fulfill those contracts, you're creating a public safety issue. That's not our problem, Patricia said. Our responsibility is to this community, not to county road crews. It will be your problem when people start dying in car accidents because the roads aren't treated properly. Someone in the audience gasped. Patricia's expression turned icy. Are you threatening this board, Mr. Nelson? I'm stating facts. There's a major storm coming in 4 days. If I can't supply materials, people will get hurt. That's not a threat. That's reality. I walked out before Patricia could respond, my hands shaking with anger. Outside, the temperature had dropped into the teens and my breath came out in white clouds. I sat in my truck for several minutes trying to calm down when someone tapped on my window. It was Linda Wu, wrapped in a puffy winter coat. I rolled down the window. Scott, I'm sorry about what happened in there. For what it's worth, I didn't want to vote yes. But you did. I know. Patricia can be very persuasive, and she threatened to call for my removal from the board if I didn't support the motion. She looked miserable. I know that's not an excuse, but I wanted you to know that not everyone agrees with her methods. Linda, why does she care so much? What did I do to piss her off? She hesitated. You really don't know. Know what? Patricia's husband, Richard, applied for a job with your company last year. You turned him down. I searched my memory. I'd interviewed maybe a dozen people last winter for seasonal positions. The guy with no commercial driving license who wanted $25 an hour to start. Linda nodded. He complained to Patricia that you were rude and dismissive. She's been looking for ways to retaliate ever since. This covenant violation is just her excuse. I slumped back in my seat. So this whole thing is because I didn't hire her husband. Patricia doesn't handle rejection well, and she really doesn't handle it well when someone rejects her family. Linda glanced back at the clubhouse. I should go before someone sees us talking. Just be careful, Scott. She won't stop until she gets what she wants. The next morning, I met with Daniel Rodriguez at his office in downtown Rockford. His firm occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated building overlooking the Rock River, and his office was cluttered with legal books and case files. They voted to fine you $500 a day. He shook his head. That's aggressive even for an HOA. Can they actually do it? They can try. But here's where it gets interesting. He pulled up a document on his computer. I've been researching Illinois HOA law, specifically the Illinois Common Interest Community Association Act. There are limitations on an HOA's enforcement powers, particularly when it comes to businesses that predate covenant changes. Linda Wu mentioned something last night. Apparently, this whole thing started because I didn't hire Patricia's husband. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's useful. If we can establish that the enforcement action is retaliatory rather than based on legitimate covenant violations, we can challenge it on those grounds. Courts don't look kindly on HOAs abusing their authority for personal vendettas. What do? I file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, blocking the HOA from assessing fines or taking any enforcement action until we have a full hearing. I'll argue the grandfather clause, the retaliatory nature of the enforcement, and the public safety implications of interfering with your county contracts. How long will that take? I can file today. We might get a hearing within a week, maybe sooner if I emphasize the emergency nature related to the incoming storm. He drafted the motion while I sat there, reviewing various legal precedents and statutory language. By noon, we had a completed filing ready to submit to the Winnebago County Circuit Court. I spent the afternoon making deliveries and checking inventory. The storm was now 3 days out, and everyone was in preparation mode. The National Weather Service was predicting 8 to 12 inches of snow with sustained winds creating significant drifting. Road conditions would be dangerous, and county crews would be working around the clock. Tom Chen called as I was driving back from a delivery in Belvedere. Scott, I've got an update. The county board met this morning and voted to designate your property as essential infrastructure under emergency procurement regulations. What does that mean? It means your facility is now considered critical to county operations, which gives us legal standing to intervene if your HOA interferes. We're drafting a letter to send to the HOA board explaining that any action taken against your business could result in county litigation. Will that scare them off? It should. Most HOAs operate on limited budgets. The threat of facing the county's legal team tends to make them reconsider. He paused. But Scott, you need to understand something. This won't make you popular with your neighbors. I'm already not popular with my neighbors. Fair point. That evening, Daniel called with good news. The court had granted an emergency hearing for the following morning. Judge Margaret Sullivan, who apparently had a reputation for being no-nonsense and skeptical of HOA overreach, would be presiding. I barely slept that night, running through arguments and scenarios in my head. By 6 a.m., I was up and checking the weather forecast obsessively. The storm had intensified, now predicted to bring up to 14 inches of snow with wind gusts over 40 miles per hour. It was shaping up to be one of the worst winter storms in recent years. The courthouse was an imposing stone building on Main Street. I met Daniel in the lobby at 8:30, and we went through security together. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lights that hummed slightly. Patricia Whitmore arrived with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking guy in his 30s named Brett Carlson, who carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from winning too many small-time cases. Karen Steinberg and Bob Martinez were there as well, sitting in the gallery. Judge Sullivan entered at 9 sharp. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. All right, let's get started. This is case number 2024-CH 1847, Nelson versus Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. Mr. Rodriguez, this is your motion. Make your case. Daniel stood. Your Honor, my client, Scott Nelson, operates a de-icing supply business from his residential property. He's been operating this business for 8 years without incident. 6 months ago, the HOA adopted new covenants that would prohibit commercial operations. However, my client's business predates these covenants and should be grandfathered under the original 2016 covenant agreement. He submitted copies of the original covenants, highlighting the relevant section. Additionally, Your Honor, this enforcement action appears to be retaliatory. The HOA president, Mrs. Whitmore, is pursuing this case because my client declined to hire her husband last year. We have witness testimony to support this claim. Brett Carlson jumped up. Objection, Your Honor, that's speculation and hearsay. I'll allow it for now, Judge Sullivan said. Continue, Mr. Rodriguez. Finally, Your Honor, my client provides critical services to Winnebago County and 16 municipalities. A major winter storm is arriving in 48 hours. If the HOA seizes my client's inventory or interferes with his operations, it will create a public safety emergency. The county has designated his facility as essential infrastructure and is prepared to intervene if necessary. He submitted letters from Tom Chen and the county attorney's office. Judge Sullivan read through them carefully, her expression neutral. Mr. Carlson, your response. Brett stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of covenant enforcement. Mr. Nelson is operating a commercial business in a residential neighborhood. The covenants are clear, and they apply equally to all residents. The HOA has a duty to enforce these rules to protect property values and maintain community standards. What about the grandfather clause? The original covenants contained language allowing existing businesses to continue, but only with annual review and approval by the board. Mr. Nelson never sought such approval. Therefore, his operation is not protected. Daniel stood again. That's not accurate, Your Honor. The original covenants required notification, not approval. My client notified the previous board in 2017, and they acknowledged his business in writing. He submitted a copy of an email from the former board president. Judge Sullivan studied the email, then looked at Brett. Do you have a response to this? Brett looked flustered. Your Honor, the new board is not bound by informal communications from previous board members. The written covenants require formal approval. Except they don't. Judge Sullivan held up the covenant document. I'm reading Section 12, Paragraph 4, which states that businesses operating prior to covenant revision must provide written notification to the board and maintain appropriate insurance and licensing. There's no approval process mentioned. Mr. Nelson has clearly met these requirements. Patricia Whitmore leaned forward and whispered frantically to Brett, who listened and then said, Your Honor, even if the grandfather clause applies, the HOA has legitimate concerns about safety, traffic, and community impact. Mr. Nelson stores large quantities of industrial chemicals on residential property. Rock salt and calcium chloride, I said, unable to stay quiet. Not industrial chemicals, materials that are sold at every hardware store in America. Judge Sullivan gave me a look. Mr. Nelson, please let your attorney speak for you. Sorry, Your Honor. She turned back to Brett. I've reviewed the materials submitted by both parties. Here's what I see. A business owner who's been operating legally for 8 years, following all applicable regulations, maintaining proper insurance, and providing essential services to the community. I also see an HOA that appears to be selectively enforcing covenants in what may be a retaliatory manner. She paused. Mr. Carlson, did your clients conduct any investigation into the retaliatory claims? Brett looked uncomfortable. I'm not aware of any such investigation, Your Honor. That's problematic. Illinois law prohibits HOAs from engaging in retaliatory enforcement actions. If Mr. Nelson can demonstrate that this enforcement is motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate covenant concerns, the entire action could be voided. Patricia stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, I object to these characterizations. The board acted in good faith to enforce legitimate community standards. Mrs. Whitmore, you're not a party to this proceeding. Please sit down. Judge Sullivan's tone left no room for argument. Patricia sat, her face bright red. The judge looked at both attorneys. Here's my ruling. I'm granting a temporary restraining order prohibiting the HOA from assessing fines, placing liens, or taking any enforcement action against Mr. Nelson's property for 60 days. During that time, both parties will engage in mediation to reach a reasonable compromise. If mediation fails, we'll schedule a full hearing to resolve the underlying issues. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Daniel shook my hand. That went better than expected. Judge Sullivan clearly saw through their arguments. What happens now? We go to mediation and try to work out a compromise. Maybe they allow you to continue operations with certain conditions, like additional screening or limited hours. The goal is to find something everyone can live with. Brett Carlson approached us, looking considerably less confident than before. Mr. Rodriguez, my clients would like to discuss potential settlement terms. I'm sure they would, Daniel said coolly. Have your office contact mine and we'll schedule mediation. Outside the courthouse, Patricia was standing next to her Escalade, talking animatedly on her phone. When she saw me, she ended the call and marched over. This isn't over, Mr. Nelson. The board will not be intimidated by county officials or activist judges. Judge Sullivan isn't an activist. She's following the law. You've made a powerful enemy today. Her voice was shaking with anger. I will dedicate every resource the HOA has to shutting down your illegal operation. It's not illegal, Patricia. That's what the judge just told you. We'll see what the appellate court says. She got in her Escalade and drove off, leaving me standing on the courthouse steps. Daniel put a hand on my shoulder. Don't let her get to you. She's angry because she lost, and she's not used to losing. The next 2 days were chaos. The storm arrived exactly as predicted, dumping 13 inches of snow across northern Illinois and creating whiteout conditions on every major highway. I worked 36 hours straight, coordinating deliveries to county road crews, municipal facilities, and private contractors. My truck was on the road constantly, and my employees pulled double shifts to keep up with demand. Tom Chen called me at 2 in the morning on the second night of the storm. Scott, you're a lifesaver. Literally. We've managed to keep the main roads passable because of your supplies. If the HOA had shut you down, we'd be looking at multiple fatalities. Just doing my job, Tom. It's more than that. The county executive is talking about issuing a formal commendation. You kept critical infrastructure operational during a major emergency. I was too tired to process what that meant. I just kept driving, kept delivering, kept making sure that road crews had what they needed to keep people safe. On the third day, the storm finally broke. The sun came out, revealing a landscape transformed by snow. Roads were slowly returning to normal, and the crisis was over. I went home, collapsed into bed, and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, there were 17 missed calls on my phone. Most were from customers thanking me, but 3 were from Daniel Rodriguez marked urgent. I called him back. Scott, we need to talk. Something happened while you were dealing with the storm. My stomach dropped. What happened? The HOA filed an emergency appeal of Judge Sullivan's restraining order. They claimed that your operations during the storm created excessive noise and traffic, disturbing residents. Are you kidding me? I was helping keep people alive. I know, but here's where it gets interesting. Several of your neighbors submitted statements to the court defending you. They talked about how you plowed their driveways for free during the storm, how you helped dig out stranded cars, how you checked on elderly residents to make sure they had heat and supplies. The judge rejected the HOA's appeal and actually extended the restraining order for another 90 days. I sat down on my couch, trying to process this. My neighbors defended me. 23 families submitted statements. Apparently, Patricia's been overplaying her hand for a while and people are getting tired of it. There's talk of a recall vote to remove her from the board. Over the next few weeks, the situation continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The local newspaper, the Rockford Register-Star, ran a feature story about my business and the HOA conflict. The article portrayed me sympathetically, highlighting the essential services I provided and questioning the HOA's priorities during a public safety emergency. The story went viral locally, getting picked up by Chicago news stations and generating significant social media attention. Patricia Whitmore became the face of HOA overreach, and people were not kind in their assessments. Someone created a Facebook group called Meadowbrook Heights Residents Against HOA Abuse that gained over 200 members in 72 hours. The mediation session was scheduled for late February at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building. Daniel and I arrived to find not just Brett Carlson and the HOA board, but also a representative from the Illinois Common Interest Community Association, a state agency that oversees HOA operations. The mediator was a retired judge named Harold Stevens, a grandfatherly man with white hair and a calm demeanor. All right, folks, let's see if we can resolve this situation without further litigation. Mr. Rodriguez, would you like to present your client's position? Daniel outlined my case. The grandfather clause, the retaliatory nature of the enforcement, the public safety concerns, and the strong community support demonstrated during the storm. My client is willing to work with the HOA on reasonable accommodations, but he will not shut down a legitimate business that serves critical public needs. Harold turned to Brett. Mr. Carlson, what does your client want? Brett glanced at Patricia, who was sitting with her arms crossed, looking furious. The HOA maintains that commercial operations are inappropriate for a residential neighborhood. We're seeking complete removal of all commercial materials and cessation of business activities. That's not a compromise, Harold said. That's a demand for total capitulation. This is a mediation, not a surrender negotiation. Patricia spoke up. We have a duty to protect all residents, not just Mr. Nelson's business interests. Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed the case file, Harold said. I've also read the newspaper coverage and the statements from your neighbors. It appears that many residents support Mr. Nelson's business and appreciate his contributions to the community. Can you explain why the board is pursuing this action against apparent community sentiment? The silent majority supports us, Patricia said. The people who signed those statements are a vocal minority. The representative from the state agency, a woman named Jennifer Park, cleared her throat. Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, we've conducted our own investigation based on complaints received about this matter. We've found several concerning issues with how your board has been operating. Patricia's face went pale. What do you mean? Jennifer opened a folder. You've been assessing fines and fees without proper notice, holding closed meetings without required notifications, and using HOA funds for purposes not authorized by the membership. These are serious violations of Illinois HOA law. That's absurd, Karen Steinberg said. We've followed all proper procedures. No, you haven't. We have documentation of at least 7 distinct violations over the past 6 months. Jennifer looked at Patricia. The state is prepared to place your HOA under administrative oversight if these issues aren't corrected immediately. The room went very quiet. Brett Carlson looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Mrs. Whitmore, did you inform me about any of these issues? They're making it up to protect him, Patricia said, pointing at me. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm a state official. I don't make things up. Jennifer's voice was ice cold. You have serious compliance issues, and if you don't address them, the state will step in. Harold leaned back in his chair. It seems to me that the HOA has bigger problems than Mr. Nelson's business. Here's my suggestion for resolving this matter. The HOA will drop all enforcement actions against Mr. Nelson, acknowledge the grandfather clause protecting his business, and apologize for the harassment. In exchange, Mr. Nelson will work with the HOA to implement reasonable screening and operational standards that address any legitimate aesthetic concerns without impacting his business operations. Additionally, the HOA board will undergo training on proper governance procedures and submit to a compliance audit by the state agency. Brett started to respond, but Harold cut him off. This is not negotiable. If you reject this proposal, Mr. Nelson will likely prevail in litigation, and the state will impose much harsher requirements on your HOA. You'll also be personally liable for any damages awarded to Mr. Nelson, which could include his legal fees, lost business revenue, and potentially punitive damages for retaliatory enforcement. Patricia stood up. This is a witch hunt. You're all conspiring against me, Mrs. Whitmore, sit down, Brett said sharply. You're not helping. I will not sit here and be lectured by some retired judge and a government bureaucrat who don't understand the challenges of maintaining community standards. Patricia, sit down, Bob Martinez said quietly. It was the most assertive I'd ever heard him sound. We're done fighting. This has gone too far. Linda Wu nodded. I agree. We should accept the mediator's proposal. Karen Steinberg looked torn but finally said, I concur. This has become too expensive and too distracting. Patricia stared at her fellow board members like they'd betrayed her. You're all cowards. Fine. Do whatever you want. I resign from the board effective immediately. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the conference room, slamming the door behind her. The remaining board members looked shell-shocked. Frank Henderson, who'd been silent throughout the meeting, said, I think we can all agree that accepting the mediator's proposal is in everyone's best interest. Harold nodded. Excellent. Mr. Rodriguez, please work with Mr. Carlson to draft a formal settlement agreement reflecting these terms. I want it submitted to Judge Sullivan within 10 days. The meeting ended shortly after. Outside, Daniel was grinning. That went spectacularly well. Patricia just self-destructed. Is it really over? The legal fight is over. The settlement terms are extremely favorable to you. You get to keep operating your business. The HOA acknowledges your rights and they're backing off entirely. Plus, with Patricia gone, the board will probably be more reasonable going forward. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. Thank you, Daniel. I couldn't have done this without you. That's what lawyers are for. Well, good lawyers anyway. The settlement agreement was finalized 2 weeks later. Judge Sullivan approved it and dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning the HOA couldn't bring the same claims again. The agreement included language explicitly protecting my business operations and requiring the HOA to obtain my written consent, before adopting any future covenants that might impact commercial activities. True to the settlement terms, the HOA installed some attractive privacy fencing that screened my storage area from neighboring properties. It actually looked nice, and several neighbors commented that it improved the appearance of my property. The HOA paid for everything, including some landscaping enhancements that I would never have bothered with on my own. In March, the Meadowbrook Heights HOA held a special election to replace Patricia Whitmore. Linda Wu ran for president and won easily, promising transparent governance and common-sense enforcement of community rules. Her first act was to establish a business advisory committee to review any future covenant proposals that might impact home-based businesses. Tom Chen made good on his promise to get me recognized by the county. In April, I received a formal commendation from the Winnebago County Board, acknowledging my contributions during the February storm. The ceremony was held at the county building, with local media coverage and a reception afterward. Several of my neighbors attended, including Linda Wu and Bob Martinez. During the reception, Tom pulled me aside. "Scott, I've got a proposition for you. The county is looking to establish a formal emergency response network for winter weather events. We want you to serve as a consultant, helping us develop supply chain protocols and coordinate with private contractors. It would be a paid advisory position." I'd be honored. Good. Because when the next major storm hits, I want to make sure we're even better prepared than we were this time. The story could have ended there, but there was one more chapter to play out. In early May, I received a call from the Illinois Attorney General's office. They were investigating financial irregularities in HOA governance across the state and wanted to talk to me about the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. I met with an investigator named Rachel Torres at a Starbucks in Rockford. She was a serious woman in her 30s who recorded our conversation with my permission. "Mr. Nelson, we've been looking into Patricia Whitmore's activities as HOA president. We've discovered some concerning patterns." She showed me a spreadsheet on her tablet. Over 18 months, approximately $47,000 in HOA funds are unaccounted for. The money was transferred to various accounts controlled by Mrs. Whitmore, allegedly for approved expenses, but we can't find documentation supporting these expenditures. I stared at the numbers. "Are you saying she embezzled HOA funds?" "We're saying there are serious discrepancies that warrant criminal investigation. The state agency's audit uncovered these issues, and they've referred the matter to our office." She paused. "We're interviewing board members and residents. Based on your conflict with Mrs. Whitmore, we thought you might have relevant information." I told her everything I knew, including Linda Wu's comment about Patricia's retaliatory motivations and the various incidents during the mediation process. Rachel took detailed notes and said she'd be in touch if they needed additional information. 3 weeks later, Patricia Whitmore was arrested on charges of theft and embezzlement. The local news covered it extensively, with footage of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs. Apparently, she'd been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including landscaping for her own property, furniture purchases, and even a vacation to Florida that she'd claimed was for an HOA conference. The total amount embezzled was over $62,000. The subsequent investigation revealed that Patricia had been falsifying invoices and forging board member signatures on financial documents. Karen Steinberg, who'd served as treasurer, was questioned but ultimately not charged, as investigators determined she'd been negligent but not complicit in the fraud. The criminal case moved through the courts slowly, but by October, Patricia pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, sentenced to 18 months in prison, and placed on probation for an additional 3 years after release. The scandal rocked Meadowbrook Heights. Several families moved out, unable to deal with the stigma and drama. But most residents stayed, determined to rebuild the community's reputation under new leadership. Linda Wu and the reconstituted board worked hard to restore transparency and trust, implementing new financial controls and oversight procedures. As for me, business continued to thrive. The publicity from the HOA conflict and the county commendation brought in new customers. By the following winter, I'd expanded operations to supply materials to 6 additional counties and had hired 3 full-time employees to manage the growing demand. The really satisfying part was watching the community come together. The neighbors who defended me during the mediation became friends. We organized a summer block party, the first in years, where people actually talked to each other instead of hiding behind closed doors. I donated some of my equipment to help clear snow from the community clubhouse parking lot, and other residents volunteered their time for various neighborhood improvement projects. Frank Henderson even apologized to me one afternoon while we were both getting mail. "Scott, I'm sorry for how I acted during that board meeting. Patricia convinced us that you were some kind of problem, but she was really the problem all along. Water under the bridge, Frank. We all got caught up in the drama. My wife feels terrible too. She never actually complained about your storage area. Patricia just used her name without permission. I ended up doing pretty well financially from the whole ordeal too. The settlement agreement included compensation for my legal fees and lost revenue during the enforcement period. The HOA's insurance carrier paid out nearly $30,000, which covered Daniel's fees and gave me some cushion to invest back into the business. By the time winter rolled around again, things had settled into a comfortable routine. I continued supplying county road crews. Municipalities across multiple counties relied on my services, and my neighbors no longer viewed me as a nuisance. The privacy fencing the HOA installed actually became a selling point when houses in the neighborhood went up for sale, described in listings as attractive architectural screening. Linda Wu turned out to be an excellent HOA president. She ran board meetings efficiently, communicated clearly with residents, and focused on actual quality of life issues rather than petty power plays. Under her leadership, the HOA repaved common area roads, updated playground equipment, and even negotiated better rates for trash collection services. One evening in December, almost exactly a year after Patricia first confronted me in my driveway, I was loading the truck for the next day's deliveries when Linda walked over from her house across the street. "Scott, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "The board wants to thank you for how you handled everything last year. We know you could have made things much more difficult, could have sued for damages beyond what the settlement provided. Your willingness to work with us helped the community heal." "I just wanted to do my job, Linda. I never wanted to be at war with my neighbors. I know. That's why we appreciate it." She handed me an envelope. "This is from the board and several residents, just a small token of appreciation." Inside was a gift certificate to a nice steakhouse in Rockford and a card signed by over 50 families. The message read, "Thank you for keeping our community safe and for your patience during a difficult time. We're lucky to have you as a neighbor." I felt unexpectedly emotional reading it. "Thanks, Linda. This means a lot. You've earned it. And hey, if you ever need anything from the HOA, my door is always open. We're all in this together." She walked back across the street, and I stood there in my driveway, looking at the card and thinking about how much had changed in a year. I'd gone from being threatened with fines and property seizure to being recognized as a valuable community member. Patricia Whitmore was in prison. The HOA was functioning properly, and my business was stronger than ever. The whole experience taught me some important lessons about standing up for yourself, the value of community support, and the dangers of letting petty tyrants go unchecked. Patricia could have worked with me from the beginning, could have found a reasonable compromise, but her ego and vindictiveness turned a minor dispute into a major crisis that ultimately destroyed her life. I finished loading the truck and went inside, where I pulled up my delivery schedule for the next day. Tom Chen had requested an extra 2 tons of material for the county yard, anticipating another storm system moving through later in the week. Business was good, my legal troubles were behind me, and I was finally able to focus on what mattered, providing essential services and being a good neighbor. The next morning I was up at 5:30 as usual, going through my routine. Coffee, weather check, load the truck. As I worked in the pre-dawn darkness, I noticed several of my neighbors had left their porch lights on, a small gesture that made the early morning work feel a little less lonely. By 6:30, I was on the road, heading to my first delivery in Loves Park. The sun was just starting to come up, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone rang with new orders coming in, municipalities preparing for the incoming weather system. This was my life now, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The HOA conflict had been stressful and expensive, but it had also brought unexpected benefits. I had a stronger relationship with county officials, better standing in the community, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up to a bully and won. Patricia Whitmore tried to seize my De-Icer stockpile, not knowing I supplied the county road crews. She thought she could use HOA rules to destroy my business out of petty revenge. Instead, she ended up exposing her own corruption, losing her position and ultimately facing criminal prosecution for embezzlement. As for me, I just kept doing what I'd always done, providing essential services, treating people fairly, and working hard to build something meaningful. The HOA learned a valuable lesson about the limits of their authority and the importance of reasonable governance. My neighbors learned that standing up to abuse of power matters, even when it's uncomfortable. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply continuing to succeed while your enemies self-destruct through their own poor choices. Patricia could have left me alone, could have focused on legitimate community issues, but she chose to make my business her personal crusade. That decision cost her everything, while I emerged stronger than before. The winter season continued, storm after storm, delivery after delivery. Each time I loaded my truck with bags of De-Icer, I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything, and how grateful I was for the support of people like Tom Chen, Daniel Rodriguez, and the neighbors who'd stood up for me when it mattered most. Life in Meadowbrook Heights wasn't perfect, but it was pretty damn good. The HOA functioned properly under Linda's leadership, community events brought people together, and my business continued to grow. We'd all learned something from the conflict with Patricia Whitmore, lessons about integrity, community, and the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. As I drove through the early morning streets of Rockford, passing sleeping houses and empty parking lots, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was my community, my work, my contribution to keeping people safe during winter's worst weather. Nobody could take that away from me, not Patricia Whitmore, not an overreaching HOA, not anyone. The road stretched out ahead, and I had deliveries to make, contracts to fulfill, and a business to run. The past year had tested me in ways I never expected, but I'd come through it stronger, wiser, and more connected to my community than ever before. That was worth more than any HOA could ever threaten to take away.